Sorry, I think we're not quite suited for each other. Let's just remain friends. This was the 30th time I had failed at a blind date. Without even thinking, I knew exactly what the other person must have thought of me. I was too conservative in my dress, didn't know how to style myself, had a stiff personality, and, to top it off, I had obsessive-compulsive tendencies. I had every stereotype that high-achieving women are typically labeled with. I furrowed my brows, my fingertips lightly moved, and I deleted this potential match's contact information. As the clock ticked, I realized I was about to be late for class. I put my phone away and quickly walked along the muddy road. Recently, a wealthy donor had contributed a building to the school. The foundation had just been laid, and the road was filled with dust. I covered my nose and mouth as I carefully made my way across, but still, I missed my step. Around me were migrant workers, bustling back and forth. I closed my eyes, already bracing for the mocking gazes of others, but just before I hit the ground, someone caught me. The person was tall and strong, with muscular arms wrapped around my waist. He smelled faintly of sweat, but it wasn't unpleasant. He was nothing like the filthy, stinking migrant workers I had imagined. "Are you all right?" His voice was deep. Still shaken, I straightened myself up, only to realize I had been nestled in his arms in a surprisingly intimate position. In all my years, I had never been this close to any man. My heart raced so fast I thought it would leap out of my throat. No, I'm fine, thank you." My voice was barely a whisper, and I hurriedly waved his arm off, keeping my head lowered. At the moment of contact, I could feel the defined muscles beneath his sleeve. They were strong, masculine, and elastic. I felt strange. I started to instinctively avoid the road where the migrant workers often appeared. I'd rather take a longer detour than pass by that place. But just a few days later, I ran into that same migrant worker again. He was wearing a coat covered in dust and faded jeans, with his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. As he listened to the director speak, he also examined the peeling walls. The building was old, and the school planned to refresh its worn-down walls while constructing the new one. "This is easy. I'll bring a few people over, and we can finish it in 3 to 5 days, I heard his voice, low and hoarse. For some reason, just hearing his voice made me feel strangely hot all over, even my legs went weak and lost their strength. His facial features were sharp, his eyes sharp as an eagle's. The aura around him rough and scorching kept me at a distance. I nearly fled back to my office in a panic. My colleague, holding a water cup, was complaining, "Those migrant workers are always around, making everything dirty and noisy. It's so annoying just looking at them." I lowered my head and sat down, my mind still fixated on how he had glanced at me just moments ago. It was like a fire had ignited within me in an instant. During the lunch break, the surroundings were quiet as usual. I'd always been a good sleeper, but today, I felt parched, restless, and unable to settle down. After tossing and turning for a while, I decided to take a short 10-minute nap. When I opened my eyes again, my head felt groggy and heavy. Grabbing a few tissues, I rubbed my eyes and headed toward the restroom. As I pushed open the door, the sound of rushing water reached my ears. Looking up, I saw him. He was standing to the side, facing the urinal. Instinctively, my eyes drifted downward, and I slowly widened them in shock. It took me a long moment to snap out of it as he calmly zipped up and walked toward me. "Seen enough?" he asked, his tone indifferent. I felt my whole body trembling, but it wasn't fear. I'm sorry. I went into the wrong restroom. I thought this was the women's." He took a step closer, and I stepped back. My back pressed against the cold wall, I had nowhere to retreat. Up close, he seemed even more intimidatingly robust. I felt like prey cornered by a predator, caught in his sharp, predatory gaze. "Don't come any closer," I stammered, clutching the tissues tightly in my hands, swallowing hard. He glanced at me coolly, then reached past my shoulder, pulling a few paper towels from the dispenser on the wall. Just as I was about to exhale in relief, he said, "Your button popped open." My eyes followed his line of sight downward. The previously neat white shirt I had on was now wrinkled from my nap, and, to my horror, the top button had somehow come undone. From his angle, I couldn't even begin to imagine what he might have seen. My face turned crimson instantly. I pressed both hands against my chest in mortified fury. You pervert." Raising an eyebrow, he smirked. "I was being considerate, and now you're calling me a pervert?" He leaned in slightly, the faint trace of amusement in his voice deepening. "If you're going to accuse me of something, shouldn't I at least do something to deserve the name?" My entire body tensed as I stared at him, unable to say a word. The lunch break was coming to an end, and the sound of voices and footsteps started filtering in from the hallway, signaling that someone was approaching the restroom. Yet he remained standing in front of me, his towering frame almost completely engulfing me. My mind went blank. By the time I realized what I was doing, I had already pushed him into a bathroom stall with me. At the same moment, the restroom door swung open. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst from my chest. Fortunately, the newcomers didn't seem to notice anything unusual and left soon after. My palms were sweaty as I reached out with trembling hands to open the door. But before I could, his arm stretched out from behind me, pressing firmly against the door. His body radiated heat, trapping me in the narrow space where every breath carried his scent. I became acutely aware of something unusual about him. What was worse, I couldn't ignore the changes in myself either. This is a school," I stammered, my voice shaky. "You can't. So what you're saying is, it'd be fine if it wasn't a school?" His breath brushed against my ear, laced with a faint, teasing chuckle. "And no, that's not what I mean. It's not okay anywhere. Next time, keep your eyes in check," he said, patting my head before reaching out to open the stall door. "You look like you're about to devour me whole." And then he left. I scurried into the women's restroom, shut myself in a stall, and covered my face with my hands, silently wailing in despair. What's wrong with me? Have I really repressed myself for nearly 30 years only to turn into a total deviant now? From that day onward, I started noticing him every day. Occasionally, I would hear his name being called as I passed by. Johnson. The weather had turned hot, and I often saw him with a few workers, perched on ladders. He wore only a thin sleeveless tank top, paired with long work pants. As he painted the walls with a roller, the muscles on his body flexed and shifted with his movements. Sometimes, when he lifted the hem of his shirt to wipe away sweat, the taut lines of his abs and the sharp V-line beneath would be exposed. It was enough to leave anyone red-faced. Even the female colleagues who had initially complained about the smell of paint stopped grumbling. Instead, they were now openly praising Johnson's physique. Some even went out of their way to walk past him, just to steal a few extra glances and savor the sight. In the office, a group of coworkers were chatting brazenly. At some point, the conversation shifted to me. "Maria, have you noticed that migrant worker? He doesn't look like a laborer, he's more like a male model. Male models these days don't even compare to him. They're all skin and bones. By the way, are you still going on blind dates?" I looked up from my textbook, adjusted my black-framed glasses, and smiled faintly without answering. Oh, please, Maria is as pure as a saint. She'd never be interested in things like this. I knew what they said about me behind my back, that I was a spinster, an old maid. My life revolved around nothing but home and school. Devoid of hobbies or any kind of excitement. But I didn't care about their gossip. If it weren't for my parents repeatedly urging me to get married, I wouldn't even bother with blind dates. As for Johnson, he probably thought I was boring too. My female coworkers dressed impeccably, some were sexy, others charming or bubbly. They exuded femininity and allure far beyond my reach. I even overheard them talking about how sometimes After growing tired of polished, high-achieving men, it wasn't a bad idea to pass the time with a rugged, earthy man. It was obvious who their target was. The renovation of the old building was soon completed, and Johnson no longer appeared there. I felt an inexplicable sense of relief. After all, he probably never paid me any attention or even remembered what I looked like. Some colleagues mentioned that they'd added Johnson on social media and had even gone out drinking with him. They raved about how he had an impressive alcohol tolerance and dressed stylishly in casual clothes, nothing like a laborer at all. So, did you make a move on him yet? Calm down. Acting too soon would just make things awkward if we run into each other at school. I've got his contact info, I can take my time. Good point. I couldn't suppress the sinking feeling in my chest. He was just a migrant worker, neither his appearance nor his background aligned with my standards for a partner. And yet, inexplicably, I had fallen for him. Not just emotionally, but physically as well. To distract myself, I threw myself into a new research project, often staying late into the night. By the time I left school, it was already midnight. The once busy construction site had fallen silent, and I walked quickly, clutching my laptop bag. I'd bought a small apartment near the school for convenience. It was close enough to walk to campus in 10 minutes, but the downside was the poor security. Late at night, it wasn't uncommon to hear drunken men howling. Sure enough, as I entered the neighborhood, I could hear the distant shouting of a drunkard from one of the buildings. I clutched my bag tightly, nerves on edge, and quickened my pace. Suddenly, I heard faint footsteps behind me. My hair stood on end as the sound grew louder and closer. Don't come any closer. Get away from me. I spun around abruptly, hurling my laptop bag with all my strength, before bolting. Wait. It's me. The figure caught my bag midair and strode toward me, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. I screamed and struggled in panic until his voice cut through the chaos. Maria, it's me, Johnson. I froze mid-struggle, my hands gripping his shoulders as I looked up in confusion. His familiar scent reached my nose, and I whimpered, my voice trembling with a mix of relief and fear. You scared me to death. Why are you walking home so late if you're this easily scared? Johnson frowned at me. I wanted to retort, whose fault do you think this is? Am I so terrifying you're crying now? Johnson sighed and gently wiped away the tears pooling at the corner of my eyes with his thumb. Come on, I'll walk you to your door. I didn't move, still curled up against him. What? Planning to stick to me now? No, it's just. My face burned. I twisted my ankle. Johnson pressed his lips together, then turned around and crouched slightly. Get on. I'll carry you. And no, that's not necessary. I hesitated. Stop wasting time. He urged impatiently. I had no choice but to gingerly climb onto his back. His shoulders were broad, his back sturdy. And leaning against him gave me an unexpected sense of security. But Johnson wasn't the least bit gentlemanly. His hand firmly supported me by my thigh, bordering on improper territory. Don't touch there, I mumbled, my face turning scarlet. Who's the one being inappropriate here? He countered, raising an eyebrow. Feeling guilty, I quickly removed my hand from where it had instinctively landed on his chest, opting instead to wrap my arms around his neck obediently. Why couldn't I seem to control my hands lately? He carried me out of the elevator, and as we approached my door, I leaned forward to unlock it with my key, our movements inevitably causing fleeting moments of contact. I felt like my head wasn't screwed on straight from the late hour. I couldn't tell right from wrong, and worse, I was starting to act provocative. My apartment was a private sanctuary no one had ever been invited inside before. Yet Johnson showed no hesitation at all. He gently placed me on the sofa and asked where the first aid kit was. I pointed to the cabinet under the TV. As he stood up, his gaze briefly flickered to a package on the coffee table, a recent delivery of mine. It had been opened but left unused. I froze, mortified, feeling like a shrimp that had just been boiled red. "What's this?" he asked, feigning innocence. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to maintain composure. "We're both adults. Why can't I use something like that?" He raised an eyebrow, his smirk full of mischief. "Since we're both adults, why not try the real thing? The experience is much better." He could say such things so casually, it was obvious he had used similar tactics to tease women before. Logically, I should refuse him. I've always been someone who overthinks everything, weighing every possible consequence before taking action. Johnson and I lived in completely different worlds, there was no future for us. I wasn't someone who could live in the moment. Who could start something with a man only to end it just as easily? And yet, the rebellious side of me suppressed for over 20 years was itching to push me towards something reckless. Johnson, seeing my silence, didn't press the issue. Instead, he quietly opened the first aid kit, retrieved some medicine, and began massaging my sprained ankle. His palms were hot against my skin, making me uneasy. And I instinctively tried to pull away. "Does it hurt?" His grip tightened slightly, keeping me from retreating. "Bear with it for a bit. If I don't help you loosen it up, you won't even be able to walk tomorrow." He knelt before me, my foot resting on his knee, his head lowered as he earnestly kneaded the sore spot. His arms were powerful, the muscles just beneath his skin flexing with every movement. I couldn't shake the feeling that he could snap my bones effortlessly if he wanted to. But for some reason, a heat began to rise from deep within me, spreading slowly through my chest. My throat went dry, and I swallowed hard, the sound embarrassingly loud in the quiet room. Johnson looked up, a faint smirk playing on his lips. The seriousness of his massage began to take on a different tone. He tilted his head slightly, his dark eyes reflecting my flustered expression as he leaned in. "Why do you keep avoiding me?" he asked, his voice low and intimate. "I'm not," I denied instinctively, my voice shaky. He didn't look away, his gaze steady as his hand slid along my calf. His fingers stopped at the back of my knee, and he pressed a light kiss against the smooth skin there. It was like pouring gasoline on a small flame. My whole body felt like it was being roasted alive. You should leave now," I stammered, panicking as I tried to pull my foot away. But Johnson held firm, his fingers tightening slightly as his jaw clenched. He exhaled deeply, as though trying to restrain himself. After a moment, he closed his eyes, took a few more deep breaths, and finally let go. "Where's your bedroom? I'll carry you in." I tried to refuse in a small voice, and "No, that's not necessary." He ignored my objection, repeating the question with a quiet intensity. "Where?" Reluctantly, I raised my hand and pointed toward the door. Up until tonight, my bedroom had been my private sanctuary. No man had ever crossed its threshold. Even when my parents visited, they stayed in the kitchen or the living room, respecting my boundaries. But Johnson walked in as though he belonged there, as though the space had always been his. There was no hesitation as he set me down gently on the bed. It felt like more than just an invasion of my physical space, it was as if he had stepped into the most private corners of my inner world. He didn't leave immediately. Instead, he moved around the room, casually glancing at things and even touching some of them, as if it were all perfectly natural. Resistance felt futile. That night, I had a dream. In it, Johnson held the things I'd ordered, those intimate, private objects, and asked me if I knew how to use them. I shook my head. With a wicked smile, he meticulously demonstrated, using every single one on me. This wasn't the first time I'd dreamt of him. He had a way of invading my dreams, asserting his dominance without any regard for reason. I knew what he was, a man of experience, a drifter with no intention of staying. I couldn't play his game. The only way to save myself was to stay far away from him. But Johnson clearly had no intention of letting me keep my distance. The next morning, when I woke up, I saw him standing in the kitchen, wearing an apron. He was stirring oatmeal on the stove with a patience I didn't expect from him. The smell of breakfast filled the air, and the overlap between the man in my dream and the man in front of me left me flustered. Johnson turned when he heard me stir. "You're awake? Go wash up." I hesitated, took a few steps toward the bathroom, then paused. "How do you even have a key to my apartment? Didn't you leave your spare key by the door?" "That doesn't mean you can just take it." "Sure, but I already did." "What are you going to do about it?" His tone was so unapologetic that I was momentarily at a loss for words. I couldn't do anything. It made me realize just how much I'd been holding double standards. I had plenty of experience with failed blind dates. Most of the men I met would describe me as difficult, overly critical, or lacking any sense of romance. To some extent, I couldn't argue with them. If they asked me out for dinner the same day we matched, I felt offended it showed a lack of consideration for my schedule. If they planned ahead, I still felt irritated after all. How could I be sure I wouldn't have something come up on the day of the date? If they asked for my input on where to go, I thought they lacked initiative and decisiveness. If they arranged the entire outing without consulting me, I labeled them as controlling or overly domineering. No matter how things played out, I was always in the right. And so, I went on date after date, each ending in failure. But Johnson seemed to have hit a nerve, bypassing every layer of my logic. If it had been anyone else taking my spare key and entering my home without permission, I'd have called the police without hesitation. But with him, I found myself tolerating it. Even justifying it. I started questioning myself. Was it because I'd been raised to be too prim and proper that someone like Johnson, rough around the edges and utterly uninhibited, held such a dangerous allure for me? Or was I simply blinded by lust? I glanced at him again, watching as he moved confidently around my kitchen. No, this wasn't just about fascination with his demeanor. I had to admit to myself. I was thoroughly overwhelmed by his presence, his sheer physicality. Johnson stayed at my apartment the entire day, working tirelessly. He cleaned every corner of the house until it gleamed, as though he'd known about my obsessive tendencies. Everything he organized aligned perfectly with my habits and preferences. Even the food he cooked was exactly to my taste. I didn't know where he had learned about my likes and dislikes. But I refrained from asking. Something told me that once I started questioning, there'd be no turning back. Time slipped by quickly, and soon it was evening. I lay absent-mindedly on the sofa, half watching a TV show, while Johnson sat at the other end, close enough that my slightest movement caused my leg to brush against his. He didn't mention leaving. But it was late. And leaving him here overnight felt improper, two people alone in the same apartment. Yet I couldn't bring myself to ask him to go after everything he'd done for me today. Caught in this dilemma, I finally blurted out, "I'm going to take a shower." It was a veiled hint, one that any sensible man would understand as a cue to excuse himself. But Johnson merely glanced at me and said, "I'll run the water for you." "With your ankle? You should soak in the tub tonight." I bit my lip in frustration, seething inwardly. Johnson was utterly shameless. He knew what I was trying to say. After he finished running the bath, he walked out of the bathroom and casually asked, "Need any help?" Help? How would he help? We weren't lovers. We weren't even friends. But he had somehow claimed dominion over my personal space, leaving me no room to retreat. What could I do? The water was the perfect temperature. I soaked in the tub, my body submerged, eyes fixed on the bathroom door. The lock on the door had been broken for a while. Living alone, I never thought it was an issue. But now, with Johnson outside, I realized how vulnerable I was. If he wanted to come in, nothing could stop him, not even me. I felt like I was losing my grip on sanity. Logic told me I should reject him outright. But everything I'd done so far, my actions, my hesitations, seemed to say otherwise. Even worse, I wasn't sure what I wanted. Was I more afraid of him coming through that door, or was I secretly hoping he would? The door stayed closed, and by the time I stepped out of the bathroom in my pajamas, I felt disappointed. When I didn't see Johnson in the living room, I thought he had left. There was a pang of something. Was it relief? Or was it loss? But as I turned toward my bedroom, I heard a noise from the balcony. Walking over, I found Johnson at the sink, sleeves rolled up, washing something by hand. I moved closer and froze. In the sink was a pile of my laundry clothes I'd just taken off, and in his hands was my most intimate garment. Johnson. My voice rose in a mix of anger and embarrassment. What are you doing touching my things? Put that down right now. Relax, he said nonchalantly, without looking up. I'm being careful. I won't ruin anything. He finished with one item and picked up another, his thumb brushing over the most delicate part of the fabric. I was too mortified to care about my sprained ankle anymore. Limping over, I tried to snatch the clothes from him. But Johnson was faster. He caught me by the waist and lifted me effortlessly. What are you thinking, running over here like that? Does your leg not hurt anymore? He scolded. Put me down. I struggled in his arms, frantic and flustered, until my hand accidentally grazed somewhere it shouldn't have. Johnson sucked in a sharp breath, his arms tightening around me with startling strength. His voice, rough and strained, cut through the air. Stop moving. I froze, realizing what had happened, and went completely still. He carried me back to the bedroom and set me down on the bed before retreating to the bathroom. The door slammed shut behind him. I sat there, heart pounding so loudly it felt like it was echoing in the quiet room. It was a long time before he came out. When he did, his hair was damp, droplets of water trailing down his bare chest. A towel was wrapped loosely around his waist, and his skin glistened with lingering moisture. I tried to look away, to be composed, but my eyes refused to cooperate. He walked over, stopping in front of me. I clutched the bedspread tightly, craning my neck to look up at him, helpless and cornered. Water dripped from his hair, landing on my cheek. He reached out, took my hand, and pressed it against the firm ridges of his abs. Go ahead, he said. His voice low and teasing. Haven't you wanted to touch for a long time? You can touch all you want. My palm rested on the hard lines of his muscles, my voice faltering as I stammered, I didn't. All right, he said, smirking. Let's just say I begged you to touch me. Does that work for you? That night, I explored every inch of Johnson's body. At first, he was patient, letting me touch and prod as I pleased. Even though his muscles strained and veins bulged with the effort of holding back, he didn't utter a single word of protest. It wasn't until I was exhausted that he took control, his smirk carrying a hint of mischief as he said I owed him a reward. When I asked what he wanted, he didn't answer with words. His actions made his desires clear. He seemed to take great pleasure in pleasing me, calling my name over and over, his voice dripping with warmth. He said my name suited me perfectly, something he couldn't get enough of. When I woke up, Johnson was gone. In the kitchen, he'd left breakfast for me, still warm. I glanced at my hands, noticing the faint redness on my palms, and wiped them nervously on the hem of my shirt as if trying to shake off the lingering heat. After 2 days of rest, my ankle had almost completely healed. I had a class to teach today, so I got dressed and headed to work. Just as I was about to enter the school gates, I ran into a colleague. She smiled and greeted me warmly, then asked if I'd had cosmetic work done recently. My skin looked flawless, like a freshly peeled egg. Embarrassed, I touched my face and shook my head with a shy smile. Wow, your complexion is enviable, she said with a TSK. Unlike me. Pulling late nights and breaking out all over. Another colleague chimed in teasingly, late nights? More like you're lacking a man in your life. Not gonna lie, it's been a very uneventful time lately, she admitted with a laugh. What about that construction worker you were flirting with last time? No progress there? Her reminder seemed to reignite something in her. Good point. with the holiday coming up. Maybe it's time to have a little fun. The smile on my face faltered. The sweetness of my time with Johnson evaporated, replaced by a stark realization: I was not the only one. Johnson had seized my weaknesses, cornered me, and relentlessly pursued me. But he had never said that I was the only one for him. He never spoke of his background, his age, or his intentions. Not once did he promise me a future. I had deluded myself into believing in something false, something fleeting. If I wanted, I could indulge in this fling with him. After all, it was mutual, consensual. When the excitement faded, we'd part ways. But I knew myself too well. I'd sink deeper, get too attached, and become bitter and stubborn. When I reached the office, I booted up my computer. A colleague casually mentioned she'd texted Johnson, inviting him out for drinks after work. Not long after, I received a message on my phone. Johnson said he had plans tonight and wouldn't be coming to my place. I pressed my lips together and didn't reply. We weren't in a relationship. He didn't owe me any explanations for his whereabouts. Johnson returned the next morning. Or rather, I suppose I shouldn't use the word return. This was my home, not his. There was a faint trace of perfume on him, a scent I didn't recognize, but could tell belonged to a woman. The first thing he did was head straight for the shower, leaving his phone casually on the coffee table. My curiosity burned, but I had no right to pry into his private life. As I sat on the sofa lost in thought, my mother called. It was the same old conversation about my marriage prospects. She pressed me again, asking why, after so many failed blind dates, I still couldn't find a man I was satisfied with. "You're almost 30, she said with a tone of exasperation. "If you wait much longer, you'll end up as someone's stepmother. You've been such an obedient daughter your whole life. Why is this one thing such a struggle? Stop being so picky, will you?" I replied softly, "Mom, I'm not being picky. They're the ones who aren't interested in me. Good men will naturally be choosy too. You have to lower your standards occasionally. Take the initiative, invite them to dinner or a show. Your personality is so rigid. Of course, they'll find you unappealing." I didn't know what was wrong with me. My whole life, I'd followed the path my parents laid out for me. They were conservative. And so I became the same. By all accounts, I should have been married by now. My personality might not have been the most charming, but my family background and career were respectable enough. Marriage, for many, was a practical arrangement. So long as neither party found the other intolerable, it would work out. But somehow, I was stuck at this step. I didn't know what I wanted until now. The blind dates weren't the problem. The problem was me. My taste in men was all wrong. After years of repressing my individuality, my latent rebelliousness emerged, and I fell for a man completely incompatible with me, a construction worker. He possessed a wildness and defiance I could never embody. And it drew me to him like a moth to a flame. But I knew our story could only end two ways. I could be his temporary plaything, discarded when he grew bored. Or, against all odds, we might develop something real, only for my parents to intervene and destroy it. No matter the path, there was no happy ending. When Johnson stepped out of the shower, I surprised him by walking up to him. I would regret this. Impulse was fleeting. But my future was long, and I'd likely look back on this day with shame, cursing myself for my lack of restraint. But in this moment, I didn't care. For once, I wanted to indulge. For once in my life, I wanted to be selfish. I wanted to let go. Johnson was good at many things. In every sense of the word. He wasn't the type to promise forever. But in the moments we shared, he knew how to make me feel like I was the only woman in the world. Despite my inexperience, I had read enough to recognize what we shared that night wasn't just physical, it was electrifying, exhilarating in ways I hadn't thought possible. When I woke up, the bed was cold. On the nightstand was a small slip of paper with a bank card and a password written on it. My first thought was absurd. Is this payment for the night? Johnson wasn't like any construction worker I'd known. He clearly had skills, and from what I'd heard, his earnings weren't meager. It made sense that he could afford such gestures. But I couldn't help but laugh at myself. Not at him, but at my own absurdity, the way I'd treated last night as if it were some sort of sacred offering. He had sent me a message, but I'd already muted notifications from him. I didn't even bother opening it. Just as I had expected, Johnson didn't come back. The man who had whispered my name with such passion, who had clung to me as though I were the air he breathed, left without hesitation. And yet, I was still surprised. He had seemed so satisfied, so fervent in his affection. I changed the locks on my apartment door, replacing them with a digital keypad. My family arranged another blind date for me. This time, my parents insisted the man was perfect, educated, successful, from a good family, and kind. He was everything they wanted in a son-in-law. To show how much they cared about this match, my mother even took me to a professional studio for a makeover. The black-framed glasses I always wore were removed, and my thick hair was pulled back into an elegant style. I felt exposed, vulnerable without my usual defenses. But my mother was thrilled. "If you had dressed like this earlier, you would have been married ages ago," she exclaimed. I found her words ironic. The very image she now adored was a reversal of what they had drilled into me growing up. I was supposed to be plain, focused on academics, never distracted by appearances. The blind date went well. The man was polite and well-mannered. For the first time, someone looked at me with something close to admiration, even awe. But instead of feeling flattered, I felt uneasy. His gaze was measured, respectful. Entirely appropriate, nothing like Johnson's. When Johnson looked at me, it felt like being consumed, as though every inch of me was laid bare under his intense, predatory stare. This man, on the other hand, was safe. Respectable. We had 2 dinners and watched 2 plays. He told me he was impressed with me, with my intelligence, my poise, my values. Finally, he asked if I wanted to pursue something more serious. I hesitated. My rational mind screamed at me to say yes. He was the perfect match, everything my parents wanted for me. Everything society told me I should want. But the words caught in my throat. Sensing my unease, he smiled kindly. "Maria," he said gently, "life's important decisions take time. I respect that. But I want to be honest, I think we're a great match. To be candid, you're the first woman I've met who aligns with me so well in background, education, personality, and values. I have high hopes for our future." The blind date politely walked me to my apartment building. As I stepped out of the car, he handed me a bouquet of red roses. "Don't forget your flowers," he said with a kind smile. Starting from our second meeting, he had brought me flowers every time. I held the bouquet and forced a polite smile, turning to head upstairs. But as soon as I turned, I saw Johnson sitting on the steps of the building, his piercing gaze fixed on me. My entire body tensed. In all my years, I had never felt this panicked. I was terrified that Johnson might confront me in front of my date, revealing the messy truth of our relationship. If that happened, my carefully constructed life would crumble in an instant. But Johnson didn't say a word. He didn't move a muscle, just sat there watching. I stiffened, walking past him without so much as a glance in his direction. The sound of the car engine starting signaled that my blind date had left. I breathed a sigh of relief as I pressed the elevator button. But through the reflection in the elevator doors, I saw Johnson standing behind me. His hands in his pockets, his presence looming over me like a shadow. I felt a tremor run through me. I didn't dare look back, stepping into the elevator with forced composure. I couldn't understand why I felt so guilty. Johnson and I had no official ties. He was free to be with other women, just as I was free to meet other men. Neither of us had the right to interfere. Yet, the atmosphere inside the elevator grew stifling. I thought I might suffocate before we reached my floor. Finally, the elevator doors opened. I fumbled with the fingerprint lock, my hands shaking. All I wanted was to escape into my apartment and shut the door. But Johnson was faster. He propped the door open with one hand and walked in uninvited. Changed the locks? His voice was calm, almost amused. You weren't trying to keep me out, were you? I clutched the straps of my bag tightly, forcing my voice to remain steady. What do you want? Johnson chuckled. What do I want? I think the real question is, what do you want? You saw it yourself, I said, exhaling slowly to steady myself. I want to find a good man, get married, and settle down. So, we shouldn't see each other anymore. Johnson's expression darkened. You take my marriage fund and then turn around to marry someone else? Maria. I didn't know you were so morally corrupt, playing men like toys. His sudden outburst startled me, and I flinched. I'm sorry. I cried, tears spilling from my eyes. I'll give the card back to you. I haven't touched the money, not a single cent. Johnson's eyes narrowed. I don't take back what I've given. If you want to get married, fine, but only to me. If you go after another man, I'll break his legs. I was stunned. You're lying. I whispered. There's no way you'd marry me. Johnson crouched down in front of me, his rough fingers brushing away my tears. Why wouldn't I? He said, his voice gravelly but gentle. Do I look like someone who sleeps around? I wouldn't have touched you if I didn't mean it. But, my parents would never approve, I choked out between sobs. He was silent for a moment before asking, what are their conditions? Tell me. And I'll meet them. Marriage isn't like eating a few extra bites of food, I said, laughing through my tears. You can't just meet their conditions. Johnson sighed, picking me up like a child and settling me onto the couch. Don't move, he said firmly, wrapping his arms around me and resting his head against my chest. Let me hold you for a while. I missed you too much. I stayed still, unable to bring myself to push him away. After a long silence, he finally lifted his head, his chin resting on my shoulder as he toyed with my fingers. All right, he said. Now let's have a serious talk. About what? Marriage. Our relationship had always been rushed and chaotic. We never talked about personal matters, never asked each other questions. The physical attraction between us was overpowering, leaving no room for logic or reason. I had assumed he wasn't interested in the details of my life. But I was wrong. Johnson knew everything about me. He had asked about me after our first meeting, my name, my age, my personality. The rest my daily habits, preferences, routines he had learned by quietly observing me, following me from the cafeteria to the classroom to my apartment. What I thought was disinterest was, in fact, a level of attention I had never imagined. When I finally found my voice, I asked, who told you all this? Your principal. You're close with him? Not really. He's close with my uncle. Who's your uncle? The guy who donated the building to your school. It took me a moment to piece it together, and when I did, something felt off. If your uncle's donating buildings, why are you working as a construction laborer? My family's in construction. He said with a shrug. My dad wanted me to start from the bottom. But honestly, I'm not into it, I'm more into cars. I made a deal with my dad, I'd work as a laborer for a year, and he'd help me open an auto repair shop. But then I got some dividends from an old investment and didn't need his money anymore. I quit, and it pissed him off so much he ended up in the hospital. My mom called me, crying her eyes out. I thought back. Was that the night you messaged me saying you weren't coming back? Yeah, he admitted. She chewed me out the whole night. Then what about the perfume on you? I pressed, my voice soft. Perfume? He frowned. Probably my mom's. Why, did you think I was cheating on you? I froze for a second, then quickly denied it. Then why'd you add my colleague on social media? I countered. To get close to you, obviously. He said bluntly. I needed a way to keep tabs on you. And the bar outing? Not just us. My buddy owns the place. I was there to support him, and she happened to be there. Maria, he said seriously, you've got a real problem. You lock everything behind mental doors, imagining the worst and blaming me without asking. Meanwhile, you're the one sneaking around with other men. Don't put it like that. It's the truth. Johnson huffed, leaning in to nip at my cheek. And you even dressed up for that guy. You never dress up for me. Do you think he can do what I can? Huh? I bet he doesn't even last an hour. Shut up. I clamped a hand over his mouth, my face burning. Johnson grabbed my wrist, his voice firm. No more games. Who are you going to marry, Maria? Him or me? I hesitated. I don't even know you that well. Whose fault is that? You never ask me anything. But fine. Let's settle this right now. He thrust his phone into my hands. Go ahead. Check everything. Ask my friends. If you find one shred of evidence I've lied to you, I'll. He paused dramatically. I'll cut it off. That's extreme. Johnson smirked. You're stuck with me, Maria. Let's get married tomorrow. First thing in the morning. Before I could respond, he scooped me up and carried me to the bathroom. For doubting me, he said with a wicked grin. You're getting a new punishment tonight. I tried to protest, but deep down, I knew I was doomed. Between his relentless energy and our undeniable chemistry, I would be living in blissful suffering for a long time. As I traced the lines of his abs, I couldn't help but laugh. Fine. This sweet burden I'd carry for a lifetime.